Well, here we are, folks. Let's chuck ourselves in the deep end. Hot topic 10, stages of learning. Okay, we've got a question we're going to start with, then we'll look at the sort of the construct of stages of learning. Look closely at the words and the phrase in the image. That's this stuff here. Select the two words or phrases that are most relevant to the associative phase of learning. And obviously, it's quite a structured question. This is going to be one of the opening questions, potentially. See, this was question 2, one of those 2 markers that appears at the start of the paper. And what I think is interesting here is that you've got 2 possible processes going on. You've either got identification going on, where you literally say, okay, I know that's to do with the associative phase, or you've got elimination. So I'm going to go through each one. I'm either going to put an I or an E next to the ones that I think are the process I'm following. The key thing I would say, though, is I've got to remember at all times I'm only talking about that phase. Okay, I'm not talking about any of this. So let's look at this. Is an associative phase learning experiencing automaticity? No. I'm going to eliminate that example. Are they experiencing unconscious control? No. I am going to eliminate that. Are they experiencing particularly jerky movements? No, that's more cognitive stage. I'm going to eliminate. Is it the practice phase? Yes, and therefore I'm going to identify that. Are they developing a mental picture? No, that's the cognitive phase, so I eliminate. Is it increased fluency or fluency getting greater? I'm confident that that's the case. So what have I got here? We've got the idea that it's the practice phase. I should have written this in white, but I haven't. In black, sorry, no, but I haven't. And this should be to do with increased fluency. And of course, what your examiner is going to come along and do, which is very simple in this particular case, is they're going to identify the 2 areas that you have correctly named, and they're going to give you a mark for one. They're going to give you a mark for the other, and then you are going to get your max there. And of course, seeking out max is one of the things we need to do as an emblematic feature of our examining as we go forward and forward. We're always trying to seek out this max character and making sure that we fulfill the requirements of the question to do that. We've got another question though. Imagine you're observing a javelin coaching session. Interesting. So I'm picturing that in me bonce. Identify 3 characteristics of a javelin thrower in the autonomous phase. So, do you see one of the things that this question's sort of done? Earlier on in the paper, it's asked us about associative, and now it's asking us autonomous. Those words can kind of get subtly confused in the mind if we make a simple mistake when we're under pressure. But we've got to get 3 characteristics of a javelin thrower in the autonomous stage. But notice this phrasing. This is not 3 characteristics of autonomous stage learning. No, that is not enough. It must be of an autonomous javelin thrower. Thrower would show efficiency, and no waste of energy, but that's not enough. Me just saying efficient is a characteristic of the autonomous stage. As they what? As they transition from the front on approach, from the front on approach to side on. So this is really important here, folks. We are saying that obviously in the start of their run up here, side on throwing action, we're saying when they start their approach, they're kind of front onto the track to the throwing line, aren't they? But as they get closer, they get side onto it, and that is a transition. And the point is, and this is what your marker will do, is they'll look for the characteristic of the autonomous phase, and they'll then ask the question, has this person clearly given an example from javelin thrown? Yes, those points get me my mark. Okay, let's do the second one. I'll try and do this one a little bit faster for you. The grip, that should have been hidden for you, the thrower is using, is the correct, accurate grip. Now, it doesn't sound like we've got really detailed there. I don't need to know the name of a javelin throwing grip, but my point is it's the correct grip for javelin throwing. So the point is, again, we've then got our situation. We're talking about a grip, and it's the correct technique. This is about technique, guys. So if I just said they must use the correct technique, no mark. But I say they've got to use the correct grip technique when they're gripping the javelin. That gets us over the line and gets the mark. And you see how many times? Can you see why lots of students would fall down here? The follow through, which should have been hidden, of the throwing action is grooved and consistent. So grooved and consistent are my characteristics here of an autonomous stage learning. But I am linking that specifically to the follow through of the throw. So those things, we link them together with spectacles, we give it a tick in this framework I'm using, and now I get my max. So we should stress here, guys, no example, no mark. And that is something that I urge you to reflect on. When you are asked to give the characteristics of something, unless it just says give the characteristics, it's got to be in relation to the context. No example, no mark. No example, no mark. That's something we need to get clear in our minds and be capable of doing. Now, I've got all the characteristics here for you, folks. I'm not just going to read them out to you. You guys can learn those, but hopefully you can start to see. We were talking here, weren't we? Honed, grooved, efficient. We used those terms just now. Correct technique, overlearned, accurate technique, these sorts of things. And again, you might want to link these back to associative characteristics, cognitive. And remember something, folks. The idea here is that people would progress through these phases, but just remember as well that people can kind of deprogress. Okay, so sort of an autonomous learner can technically deprogress back to the associative phase. We tend to find this one doesn't happen as much, but of course what we're trying to get is almost like a bore shift to the right. We're trying to get people shifting to the right here through skill development, through practice, and perhaps practice is something we'll come back to at certain points in this session. We are officially halfway there, folks. One of the biggest assessed topics on our exam is leadership. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be on the exam this year. We don't know, but it is commonly on exams, so therefore we want to be ready. Explain why an activity leader might use an autocratic approach to leadership. So I think that's a nice command. It's pretty clear. It's an activity leader. It's fairly general, so it gives us a general context of why they might do this. Because autocracy is ideal for dangerous, and I'll come back to this, dangerous or potentially dangerous, you might say, situations such as outdoor adventure, but also if the group is large. These are some of the advantages of autocratic leadership style, and the leader wants to develop conformity. Now, I know some of you study psychology, and you know some of the horrible history of let's go show that any horrible histories, but you know some of the history of sort of studies into conformity and what have you, sort of historically speaking. So this might be a bit of a condemned word to you, but actually in leadership, developing conformity can actually be quite important to getting things done efficiently and safely. So we'll just kind of consider that. My point I want to make on that one is that this student has wasted no time on that question. They've got 3 marks available. They've made 3 very clear links. This concept here, as we'll see right now, that is directly linked to autocracy. This large groups is directly linked to autocratic styles, and developing conformity, or what you might say sort of like control style, I suppose you could call it, is directly linked to our autocratic style. How do we know that? Because I want you to be aware of this imagery here. Now, we were asked about autocratic style, and you can see here that we've got groups with large numbers, we've got develops conformity, and we've got dangerous activities in there. So these are, this here, everything in those brackets there, these are evaluative. These are evaluative structures for leadership styles. So if you're asked to evaluate different leadership styles, your AO1 will be this. You obviously need to apply them into whatever the scenario is, and then effectively your evaluation is what's below. Now you might be thinking, well, these are all positive, James, how can I put the negatives? Well, it's very easy to make a negative out of the autocratic style, because you can say, for example, it's not that effectively when groups are small. It's not that effective when the leader doesn't appear confident. You just invert these, and we've got descriptions and we've got evaluations, obviously, of autocratic, democratic. And I just want to draw attention to laissez-faire. We often go, oh, this one's not so good, don't use this one. But a couple of things I'd like to know about this sort of stand aside, letting things happen sort of model. It's actually, yes, it can lack direction and guidance, and people can give up and task persistence can drop, but there are positives. In some situations, such as team building or outdoor adventure, the laissez-faire style can be really important. Now, that doesn't mean that in outdoor adventure, you go to someone, yeah, whatever, be lay, make your own figure of 8 knot and be lay however you feel like it. No. This is more to do with standing aside so other people's leadership skills can come to the fore within a group. That's why someone would do it. So I just want to make that sort of clear to everyone. Moreover, folks, we just want to make sure that we have clarity. These are the characteristics of an effective leader. Can I just stress to you, just a kind of a health warning? This is not what I'm going to say here is nothing more than my opinion, and by all means you can ignore me, disagree with me, that's absolutely fine, but a little health warning. is that when you when you read leadership characteristics or characteristics of an effective leader, they can come across as kind of quite masculine, quite male. You've got this idea of clear goal. I'll come back to empathetic. Good technical knowledge, experience, charisma. This word here especially, charisma, presence. These tend to lean, not always, towards a masculine kind of persona. And one of the things we should be aware of is the legacy of research around leadership has focused dominantly on males. Now, I would just sort of highlight this as the exception. What about people who are empathetic, great listeners? What about people who understand or have an emotional range and understand clearly different types of emotions? Now, that doesn't have to be a female, but that tends to lean towards females more commonly. And therefore, I would just say we need a health warning that we're still in a situation where leadership research has got a legacy of kind of masculineness. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's balanced up with feminineness, if I can put it that way. And I think still at the moment that's not the case. So I just want to give a little bit of a health warning. Do not assume that these are the only leadership characteristics. They might be the only ones that get you a mark, but they're certainly not the only ones out there. Types of leaders. Okay, we've got our different groupings. Emergent, these people come from within the group. They're experienced performer, becoming a player, manager or coach. Coach becomes the caretaker manager, this kind of thing. That's what I mean. Someone emerging from a group. Someone who's a prescribed leader, appointed from the outside of the group. Non-native coaches appointed as national manager. New signing becomes the captain. You know, these are the things that we consider to be more to be a prescribed leader. Now, I always want to, in these situations, I want to kind of give a couple of examples. I think this one over here, the prescribed leader, the one I really like to give is Serena Wiegmann. I always end up spelling her surname incorrectly. Serena, forgive me if I've got your surname correct. You might even have another N on the end of there, I'm not sure. But manager of the Lionesses, the England team. Previously, the manager of the Holland national team, went on to win the Euros, has been to the World Cup final. That's a really interesting model, I think, here. The one I think that's an interesting one with regard to an emergent leader, I like to think about Gareth Southgate. Now, okay, he's not men's England manager at this point, but he has been for a big chunk of the recent past and had a very successful period, one would argue, but very much came from that kind of infrastructure. He was very connected in the FA. He was working in the youth setup. He was developing the overall schemes and the product that they were trying to develop. And I think there's some nice examples of different types. Okay, what are the theories behind leadership? Well, we have trait theory. This is this very masculine sort of background, by the way. And look, male characteristics I mentioned earlier. And again, by the way, nothing wrong with male characteristics. My point is they're just not the only ones. Anyway, trait theorists argue, but people were born leaders. It was biological, it was stable trait, it was enduring, it was predominantly male. And social learning is irrelevant. You know, that's a very kind of traditionalist view and one you'll recognise from your personality studies and things like that. Social learning theory of Bandura et al. What we're talking about here is learn from others, modelling. Vicarious. Remember, vicarious means we learn it from external experiences from others. We learn from role model significant others. Leadership is more likely it's reinforced. So there's a little bit of operant conditioning in there. Obviously, that relates to a positive reinforcement, negative, and also to punishment. And traits are irrelevant. Now, this seems a bit strong as well, right? So that's why we've got this sort of interactionist intermediate kind of model, which basically say traits and environments interact to influence leadership. People are born with certain traits but can make more or less of them. That's an interesting way of thinking about things. Innate leadership skills are displayed when the situation demands it. You know, we know that from the kind of the Hollander model of personality, and it seems to be applied here as well. And success occurs when the situation draws out leadership traits. Okay, so if the situation is one where it demands leadership will be drawn out of someone if those traits are in that person. Now, again, I'll just give you my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with me by any means, but I tend to believe that the truth is kind of here-ish. Okay, here-ish. I think it's there, which would mean, I suppose, you have to consider some kind of trait. So I might be sort of more in that space there. And that's why we put these colours behind, because you can kind of consider your own personal opinion as to which of those is the best explanation. Now, I love Shaladagerie. First of all, it's got a cool name. But Shaladagerie gave us a very clear model of how different factors are able to implicate why a leader must be adaptable. And I want to be clear here, no matter what we talk about with Shaladagerie, the whole premise is that leadership is an adaptable series of behaviours. We have to lead differently in different scenarios. So let's have a little look at this. Let's imagine this is you or me. Okay, you're a leader. This is you. Let's make it you. And I'm imagining you here. Oh dear, I'm imagining you here, and I'm just going to imagine, right, that generally speaking, I'm going to imagine. Look, I'm going to imagine that you're 18. I'm going to imagine that you're an A-level student, and I'm going to imagine that you've done some leading, right? You've probably led an activity session or two. You've probably done a few warm-ups in your time, that sort of thing. What that means is that your tendency when you sort of work with groups is you tend to be quite democratic, okay? You tend to be quite democratic. But I'm going to put you in a situation. I want to put you in a situation where you are coaching 30 male year 7 javelin throwers. Well, they've never done javelin before, but they're going to do javelin for the first time. Maybe you're assisting in a PE lesson or something like that. That's who the member. In fact, you've got 30 males. This bit here, that are year 7s. This bit here, you are teaching a javelin lesson as the scenario. Okay, and let's say that the members overall, let's say that generally speaking, those members prefer democracy. Now, I'm going against the trend here because males will often prefer autocracy as an average, but I want to just create a picture here. Your tendency is to be democratic. The members in the group, their preference would be the leader is democratic. But because this is a potentially dangerous javelin situation, because you've got a large group, the situation demands an autocratic approach. So what we've got here for the required behaviour, we have got autocracy. We have got the members, they prefer democracy. Now, my question to you is, which one are you going to go with as the actual behaviour? Taking all those factors into account, are you going to go, look, I tend to be democratic, the kids like democratic approaches, or are you going to go, look, if someone gets a javelin in the neck, that's a problem, and therefore I've got no choice to be autocratic, and that is the solution here. Even though you've got this kind of even though you've got this kind of democracy kind of preference, even though you've got the fact that you prefer democracy, this is so strong. This situational characteristic is so strong, it implicates what the person has to do. Now, because the leader has been adaptable, chosen autocracy, that is going to lead to more group success, more group satisfaction. The productivity of that experience is going to be greater. Why? Because the leader has shown adaptability, has chosen an autocratic approach, is controlling the scenario for safety reasons, and maybe eventually different activities could allow that to become slightly more democratic. I think another one, imagine you were doing or coaching or leading an 8-week block of swimming. And by the way, in the first lesson, you did not know how good your group was at swimming. So again, you might prefer democracy. The kids might prefer democracy, year 7s, let's say. But in lesson 1, you got to be really clear in what you expect of them, because otherwise someone could drown. So it might be that in week one, you very much have an autocratic style. In week 2, you have an autocratic style. And by week 3, you're a bit more kind of blended autocratic democrat. In week 4, you're a bit more kind of blended. And in week 5, you can even be a bit more democratic, perhaps, if your coaching's going well. What does that come back to? Shaladagerie tells us that a leader has to take into account their own characteristics, the situation, and the members, and they have to be adaptable to that. Okay, and that's ultimately all Shaladagerie told us. Train flying past me, like they're brilliant. Okay, aggression. We're going to do effectively half of this entire topic. We're going to look here at social learning theory. We're going to look here at frustration aggression. So, question: explain why Dollard's frustration aggression hypothesis is considered an interactionist theory of aggression. I always think the name Dollard sounds like an insult somehow, like a friendly insult. Oh, have you seen Trevor recently? I haven't seen him for a while. What's he up to? Oh, I don't know, the big Dollard. Anyway, that was not necessary. What I do want to mention here is explain why. You'll be seeing terms in here like because, therefore, this means. You can see that straight away from the answer. So why is the frustration aggression interactionist? Because it states that frustration always, and we'll model this out in a second, always leads to aggression. So that's why it's considered kind of trait to aggression. That's why it's considered kind of trait regression. But also because punishment or catharsis are situational. Punishment or catharsis is situational. So let's have a think about this. What we're basically saying is that this part of it here, this part of it, frustration always lead, that word always is obviously a trait. That gets us the mark for the trait aspect, but also because punishment or catharsis, whichever way that goes, is the situational component. And it just finishes off here. Therefore, it has both trait and situational characteristics. We get our max in there. Excuse me. And I'll explain that model to you in a second, okay? Well, we've got another example here. We've got a question here, which is not explain why, but this time's evaluate. Okay, so you're going to see language like a strength, a weakness, a positive, a negative. This is what you should be expecting. Why? Because we've got this command here. For this command, we should explain why. We should be seeing because. We should be seeing because. We should be seeing therefore, comma. Ultimately, it will not give you a mark to write the word because, but what it will mean is that when you've got an explain why question, if you are finding reasons in your mind and then writing down because of the following thing, it means that you are thinking and ultimately writing in that explain why framework. Obviously, you need to know the answer, but that's what we're here for, isn't it? Now, let's have a look at this one. We've got evaluate social learning theory as an explanation for aggression within sport. A strength of the theory is that it shows the influence of others, which of course is a helpful theory, including peers, I find the word peers a weird word. Don't you think so? Peers and parents. So basically, the people that are around, let's say a young person, influential friendship groups, those that are like them, and parents, they can have an influence on whether someone is aggressive or not, and that's part of obviously the social theory makeup. Another strength on the back of this point is that this gives the opportunity for coaches to educate. So I want you just to step back at this point and think about this. If those around a person can influence a person's behavior, tendency to be aggressive or not, then that enables coaches, it enables parents, it enables teachers, it enables peers to be able to help someone act differently, whether that's to be more or less aggressive. I'm assuming less, but I suppose it could be more. Another strength is that it explains why some performers seem to it suggests why some performers seem to change character when they cross the white line. When they, air quotes, cross the white line. Could obviously be different sporting environments, but we'll use that one as our metaphor. Cross the white line. But weaknesses are, and of course we've got 5 marks to pick up here, so we can't just do strengths. In fact, when you've got a question like this and it's sort of uneven, like a 5, it's an odd number, you want to be looking at 3 and 2, 3 strengths, 2 weaknesses, 3 weaknesses, 2 strengths. That is a general model that would be quite reliable to you. But weaknesses are that it neglects traits. So basically, this theory basically says, traits ain't all that. In fact, they've got nothing to do with this, which seems sort of throwing the baby out of the bathwater to a degree, right? Surely people are born with some kind of... Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but that's the argument entirely, and this does not seem balanced. And that, unlike the aggressive cue hypothesis, it does not consider specific environmental cues. So you might remember that the frustration aggression hypothesis is quite generic. It sort of considers the environment generically, whereas the aggressive cue hypothesis says it depends on the appearance of specific environmental cues. So the frustration aggression, we're basically saying, I'm talking about the social learning theory. Sorry, I went back to the other. Social learning theory is quite generic. It's sort of saying the environment influences, whereas the aggressive cue hypothesis specific cues. Now, the point I want to make here, guys, I'll use green and red here. Look, strength. I'm going to circle in green. I've got one there. Opportunity for coaches to educate. There's another one there. We've got changing when crossing the white line. That's there. Now that's a submax. I've got my 3. I need to get onto the other side of this. Oh, I'm assuming it's a submax. It neglects traits. That's a weakness. And it ignores specific environmental cues. That's how we get a max. Now I've used red and green there, not because your examiner's going to use red and green, just to show you the balance that this particular student's used between positives and negatives. Now guys, here, defining assertion, nice and simple for us. Okay, assertion is physical play, and play in the sense of as playing within sport, that is not breaking the rules and does not intend to harm. So assertion is kind of, sometimes words you might want to use are robust play. I often think a great example of this is a basketball player driving towards the basket on a layup or a dunk approach. And if they contact with shoulders an opponent in the way, they're not trying to hurt that person, but they're willing to, air quotes, go through that gap and to find that contact in order to be able to go and score. So I think that's a nice way to think about assertion. Okay, a couple of other things. Barron said any form of behaviour direct towards the goal of harming or injuring another living being is motivated to avoid such treatment. Okay, so this is what we mean. Nice quote about aggression from Barron there. Anyway, social learning theory. What have we got here? We have got descriptions. We have got evaluations. If you are asked to describe social learning theory, here it is. If you are, and you might have to do that in context with an example, if you are asked to evaluate it, you must give the positives and the negatives. That is why we looked at that question previously. Now, this one's an interesting one. We've got back to our big dollard here, frustration, aggression, hypothesis. Let's actually look at the evaluation collectively, okay? What have we actually got here as our evaluation? So, just to remind ourselves of the model, we've got a drive to a goal, and for us, obviously, it's a sporting concept. Let's imagine you're trying to, win a badminton rally. There's an obstacle to a goal, such as, you trip, or the opponent plays a great shot, or a net cord goes against you, and frustration occurs in the individual, okay? Now, what we're saying here is that this element here is the trait element. When a person becomes frustrated, aggression will occur. Now, maybe that aggression will be throwing the racket to the ground, swearing, shouting, staring down the opponent, having a whinge at the umpire. I don't know what the form of the aggression would be. But then we've got a situational aspect, and I'll put S here and S here for situational. Why? Because what we've got here is a situation where that behavior might be effective. Now, I think the word effective is better here. Does it release the frustration? If it does, and they kind of get away with it, that's going to have a cathartic approach. The aggression is going to kind of dissipate. The frustration is going to leave them. If, however, they are warned or they're docked points, they receive a punishment, something like that, they get a code violation and a warning, that can cause a tendency to increase frustration, which again can loop back around. So that's an interesting one. That's not to say that umpires, referees shouldn't punish aggressive behaviours if it's outside of the rules and it's detrimental. They definitely should. But the point we want to make is that we just need to have an awareness that it may lead to a kind of a rotational and circling kind of what's the word I'm looking for, of ongoing frustration. Now, what we obviously need to do is we need to be able to kind of evaluate this thing. Okay, so let's think. What are strengths of this model? I'll put them into green for you. Let me slightly darker green. So what are strengths of this? It's more realistic, and I'm talking about than trait theory. It's more realistic. That's one thing. Is the idea of blocks or blockages is helpful. So this obstacle aspect, this gives us, this gives us sort of warning that aggression might occur, especially with certain individuals. So that blockages is kind of helpful. We do see that catharsis does happen when people show aggression and they kind of have success with it. It kind of dissipates and leaves those person. That's, you very often see a tennis player smash the racket and then be calm afterwards, right? It's kind of a nice one. We also think that the link between frustration and aggression link is good. And what we mean by that is that there is a fairly strong argument that frustration does lead to aggression. But so that link seems to be a pretty good one. But the other one, it helps coaches. Okay, it helps coaches because coaches effectively, they've got the signals that are going to cause a warning sign for these kind of aggressive acts. So there's certain kind of manageable aspects there, but there are weaknesses to this. Look, F does not always, that could be in the key word, cause aggression. So F does not always, frustration does not always cause aggression. A can happen without F. And what I mean by that is that this doesn't need to be the predecessor of aggression. Someone can act aggressively out of a tactic. So therefore that doesn't, hit in a big rugby tackle against the best player in the opposition team. That's not about frustration. That's about, it's tactical, I suppose you'd say. We've also got the fact that it doesn't take into account social learning. And the idea that aggression can be learned. It's saying that frustration causes it, and that's something to be considered. Unpunished does not always cause catharsis. So we do have situations where aggressive acts will go unpunished and catharsis won't happen. So we've got no traits in it. So we've got no traits other than this one. Okay, so it doesn't take traits into account enough, in our opinion, and not everyone becomes frustrated. So this idea, becomes frustrated. So this idea that frustration is the predecessor, the point we're going to make here is that this can skip. Okay, this can skip, and therefore there's some weaknesses in this particular model. Anyway, lots of information there.